Assalamu alaikum. Welcome to Game Changer. I'm Maryam Zia. In today's program, we will be focusing on the current exercise that is happening in India, that is the general elections of India. Of course, we know that there are 7 phases of these elections, and results are to be announced on 4th of June. When we talk about these elections, of course, there are a lot of anticipations regarding the results of these elections, and a lot of people are saying that BJP is going to be getting a third term. But what it means for the minorities in India, there are a lot of concerns, not only within the minorities in India, but of course international organizations and UN is also raising concerns that a third term for BJP might be detrimental for these minorities, especially Muslims living within India. When we talk about these elections, of course, and these dimensions, these context, when BJP is moving towards making India a Hindutva state, or then a lot of responsibility falls on the shoulders of these Indian voters. What needs to be done to, of course, safeguard the rights of these minorities? What is at stake for minorities? When we talk about these elections, we will be talking about all these dimensions of the current exercise of general elections taking place in India, where, of course, BJP and opposition and India Alliance, as well as other parties are vying for 543 Lok Sabha or lower parliament seats. To discuss this and more, we are joined in the studios by Mr. Altaf, who is member APHC, All Parties Hurriyat Conference. Welcome to the program. We're also joined by Mr. Jauhar Saleem, who is a foreign secretary, and currently he is heading Institute of Regional Studies, Islamabad. Welcome to the program. Sure. So, and we are also joined online by Mr. Irtaza Shafaat, who is Professor of Political Science and Doctoral Researcher at Center for Public Policy and Governance. Welcome to the program. Mr. Jauhar, let me start with you. When we talk about this current exercise that is taking place in India, the world is looking towards this because nearly 1 billion people are going to be voting in these elections. What it means for minorities when we look it from afar as a neighboring country, and then we will divulge into other dimensions of these elections.
Yeah, it is. India is called the biggest democracy in the world, despite all the flaws that are becoming more and more apparent. And at a time when this facade of secularism and the facade of democracy in many ways is wearing thin. What we see now is the third election which Modi is likely to win. In the past 2 elections, they won overwhelming majorities. This time as well, there are similar expectations. Now, in terms of minorities, it becomes even more important. Why? Because Modi has a plank of Hindutva. He basically wants a majoritarian tyranny. He wants a Hindu Rashtra. This is what RSS wanted. This was a long time ideology of RSS. And we have to recall that RSS, in the days that they were struggling, during the Congress power days, they wanted to change the Indian constitution. In fact, they had stated objectives of changing the Indian constitution, which has very clear clauses calling for secularism and minority rights protection and human rights protection as well. Now, BJP is an offshoot of RSS, and it's still actually technically it's still a wing of RSS, a political wing of
political
RSS.
Wing, rightly said.
Now, what they want, some of the things which they had claimed that from an RSS plank, which Modi had promised that he would do in his second term or in his first term, some very important ones from their perspective they've already done. For instance, 3 things come to mind. One is the Babri Mosque issue, where they've already constructed the Ram temple. Second is, he said he would take away the some of the Muslim laws, Muslim specific family laws, for example, the right of 3 divorces, triple divorces, and some other family laws. And then the third was his promise that he would get rid of, in their perspective, or do away with, the Article 370 in Jammu and Kashmir. He's done all these 3 things. Now, this time, if they come to power, the minorities are very concerned because last time they were very close to a 2/3 majority. Out of the 543 seats in Lok Sabha, last time they won 303. But with their allies, that number reached 352. For an outright 2/3 majority, they need over 360. So if they get a 2/3 majority this time, then the threat is, and what they have promised as well in their campaign, and RSS has been saying that in particular, that they would change the very nature of Indian constitution.
Exactly, and that is very concerning. We will be talking about the role of Indian institutions, especially the Supreme Court as well, later in the program. But Mr. Wani, when we talk about these concerns raised by minorities, not only minorities within India, but also international organizations, human rights organizations, are also raising their concerns about these. But when we talk about voter sentiment in this democratic exercise, do you think that voters are going to be considering these things when we talk about, of course, NDA alliance that BJP is part of, and also the India alliance? Do you think there are much differences, ideological differences regarding the rights of minorities in these opposition and the current government alliances?
You think, as Ambassador rightly pointed out, what is the ideology of the BJP or the RSS, what they wanted, and they wanted to amend the constitution at the end of the day and do away with many things. And among those things is to, now what they have done so far, that's there, but what is their ideology is that they always talked about Muslims as the others. They criminalized Muslims, and we can see the way India is going right now in Modi's days. It is like what Jim Crow did in 19th century in United States of America.
And it took years and centuries, decades for US to come back from that.
At least 2 centuries to come back for that.
Yes.
And nearly we saw on 10th of February, the BJP had a meeting after the inauguration of Ram temple, when they say that the Hindutva will last. Now the India will be one, and Hindutva will last for 1,000 years. What that mean? That means they are going to change the constitution. They are either like the Sarwarkar or Gavalkar, what they said, what is their ideology about, that either you be in India as Indians, toe the line of majority, and otherwise leave the India at your sweet will. So this India is for the Hindus. They want to make the Hinduism and the Hindutva as its as their agenda is to all the minorities to pursue that. That is one of their things. But the concern, what we saw at the beginning of the elections in India, the election campaign when it started, one could think that this time BJP perhaps will contest the elections on its mantra of development, on its mantra of digital India, or what they say.
Economic reforms.
Economic reforms. We have held the G20 presidency and all that. They will do that. But the first phase of elections, what the voting predictions were by different forms, BJP was almost frustrated by that. And then we saw that again, the BJP leadership at the top, like Narendra Modi, who is himself as Karsevak of RSS, but as the Prime Minister of India, he has always remained mum on these things. He has not spoken himself. He was not in any way responsible for any hate speech. But then we see again, then the Prime Minister of India himself, Narendra Modi, talking about the Muslims, talking about the Muslims as infiltrators, talking about the Muslims as they will be the majority, they are producing more children, and they will take all your and your Mangal Sutra. And this is a way to target the majority. They are targeting the majority that you are in danger. You are in danger.
And
so
concept of otherization of the
otherization
Muslims.
of Muslims on one way, on the other way, making it threatening the majority that you are at threat. You are at threat by these elements. And yesterday also in Maharashtra, again he talked about the Mughals, he talked about sultans and all that, what they have done to India and all.
Right.
That is only to get
Flare
more
up
and
the
more sympathy,
sentiments
more and more sympathy of the voters, of those radicalized Hindu voters, which we saw a shift in perhaps because the lot of unemployment has risen in India in this case.
Of course.
And the reports which show that Indians are the most of the Indians live below poverty, they live poorly, although the figures show they have this
So
much
there
of
is a lot of
resource and development.
discrepancy in the
There are
data as well.
discrimination, there is discrepancies in their data as
We
well.
will be talking about the on-ground situation and the promise of economic reforms that Modi, of course, promised to his people, especially the youth. But Irtaza, when we talk about all these dimensions, and as Vani Saab also alluded to the Jim Crow laws, do you also see some similarities between the Hindu nationalism that is prevailing in India today and the racial segregation that we see in the history? Do you think that this should be concerning, and can you provide us more insights into this?
There are multiple levels on which this could be addressed, but I guess for the sake of the audience, it's important to state that there are almost 16% Muslims in India right now, according to the 2011 census. And the census is also a contested issue at this point in time. But not a single legislator at the national level was a Muslim from the BJP. There were 26 in 2014 and 21 in 2019, but none from the BJP. On the other hand, whether or not the BJP institutionalizes policies which actively discriminate against Muslims remains a question in history. Mob lynching, cow lynching, love jihad narratives have made life difficult, not just in the rural areas, but in the urban areas as well, for not just Muslims. So for example, if you look at Manipur, for example, so the issue is between Hindus and Christians, and there were riots last year leading to almost 160 deaths. Now, if you look at the empirical data available to us, whilst the Freedom House Index in America ranks India as partly free at 66 out of 100, compared to Pakistan, which is at 37 out of 100, it's a democracy index. Interestingly, the Varieties of Democracy Index has labeled India as an electoral autocracy from Sweden. And if you look at the World Press Freedoms Index, which is done by Reporters Without Borders, India actually ranks worse than Pakistan at 161 out of the total countries, and Pakistan is at 149. Not to make any comparison of that sort, but in some ways, I think Aisha Jalal's words ring true, that India was always, even though India managed to have minimal procedural democracy in one sense, and elections were held, but the substantive element of the democracy was also always missing in many frameworks. And I think it's more nuanced than just BJP being an anti-Muslim entity, because in history, Congress has also manipulated the feelings of the minorities.
Right, and that's what I want to ask you about. That do you think there are much differences when we talk about the ideologies of Congress or BJP, especially when we talk about the minority rights? Do you think that is going to be impacting voter sentiments at this point in time?
Definitely, Modi comes from the saffron framework and has been using ostensibly the Hindutva framework to try to garner votes and support amongst the majority. The Congress stands on a center-left kind of framework, and also Mamata Banerjee to a certain degree has Muslim sympathies on the one hand, but there are surprising things. So for example, in West Bengal, in the national elections, the seat sharing did not work. So the Congress, the Communists, and the Trinamool Congress are fighting amongst each other. So when it comes to the India alliance, which is an assortment of more than 20 parties, there seems to be no coherent ideological framework that they strictly agree with, which means that the BJP framework in the contestation of ideas in history stands stronger, unfortunately. And even in Maharashtra or in the UP, for example, with the caste-based parties as well, the India Alliance does not stand strong cohesively in terms of internal squabbles which have seriously deteriorated their ideological moorings. And in that sense, the BJP stands to gain from things just as they did exploiting the Anna Hazare movement against corruption, where the Aam Aadmi Party was able to get Delhi, but nothing apart from that. And BJP gained on the anti-incumbency factor against
But
the
still,
Congress.
BJP considered that a threat, that of course he was able to capture Delhi, and that was the reason that a sitting CM was arrested. So, despite controlling media, it still was a concern. So let me take this question to Mr. Jauhar. Do you think that there are much ideological differences when we talk about the past instances of minority rights violations in India, and also how much influence RSS is still playing in BJP? Because when we talk about the third term that is being anticipated in India, so a lot of things are already being done, that is changing the history, foundational texts are being changing, and like Wani Saab alluded to, the otherization of Muslims that is being done. So what do you make of it?
Yeah. Firstly, in terms of India's history, like for all the years that Congress party was in power, it was not a pro-Muslim party either. You know, there's a long history of rights, Hindu-Muslim rights in India, and Indira Gandhi's policies are very clear. You know, she was seemingly hostile to Muslims, and many other Congress leaders as well. But BJP is another level totally, because this, as I said, is an offshoot of RSS, and RSS had a fascist ideology and probably still retains the basic perimeters of that ideology. Now, in terms of the linkage of the RSS and BJP, BJP started as a political wing of RSS. Within the RSS framework, it's still a political wing, and that is why in the annual Congress of RSS, which happens in Nagpur, annual congregation, BJP leaders have to go there, and they have to account for their performance for the past year. Every year that exercise takes place. We also have to remember Modi's past. Modi is now literally like a super national figure in India. But how did he enter politics? He was basically an RSS worker. He was RSS spokesperson. When suddenly he was nominated for the chief ministership of Gujarat. And we have to remember, he was not an elected member of the assembly then when he was nominated. So he became the chief minister first, and then he got elected afterwards. So he was basically responsible to the RSS leadership in the center. And that is, and always he has sort of, he's tread that path whereby he seems to be more responsible to RSS, because they catapulted him to this level of politics. Now, so this linkage is very clear. Now, RSS ideology is also very clear, because over the years, they seem to have sort of, for the optics, they seem to have moderated some of their planks. But the fact is, the core ideology is the same, which is that they want to see India as a Hindu Rashtra, as a Hindu republic, so to speak, and they want to see it as a country which is basically for the Hindus, for their ideology, where Hindus could live as per their code of life, and there's actually no place for minorities there. That is their ideology.
Right, and also at the back of it is their concepts of victimhood of Hindus, the way they are trying to rewrite history.
Yeah.
What do you make of it? And does it actually resonate with the voters of India?
Yeah, that's the interesting part, because what they've done over the years is they've changed the textbooks. They've literally changed, they've expunged all the history of 700, 800 years of Muslim rule in India. Now the Mughal rules, which Indians within the Congress party also owned. They didn't really own some of the sultans and everything, but because they felt, okay, Mughals, especially after Akbar, they kind of sort of got diluted with the Rajputs, and there was some sort of a like joint ownership. So because of that, Mughal rule of 300 years got some allowance, but this now has been changed as well. So now they think that they just take them as not only invaders and intruders, but literally like villains of Indian history. That is how it has been, and all those who have been fighting them, like Shivaji and all, they are their heroes now. And and it's not just a history. Muslims are being portrayed, Muslims living in India, like in his Rajasthan speech, for instance, the recent one, where he said, okay, those that produce more children and those which were given more resources by Manmohan Singh and the Congress party, and those who are Ghusbatias, but they actually snatch your resource. Such strong language, as you are basically talking of an enemy, of a group that hostile to you. All the Muslims constitute 16% of the Indian population. As per their census, it's probably slightly more than that. But it's very interesting. If you see in these 543 constituencies in India, there are about 52 constituencies where Muslims constitute more than 33%. And there are only 12 constituencies now where Muslims are in a majority, right? 3 of those constituencies are in Jammu and Kashmir, then there's some in West Bengal, then there's Assam, so these are like split like this. But if you see, like it has been mentioned, in the last elections there was not even a single Muslim member elected from the BJP party. That means that Muslims are practically disenfranchised in India, because in a parliamentary democracy it's only the winning party which runs the system.
Of course.
Right? And if they have not even a single member there, that means they are practically
so there is no voice of Muslims at the higher levels, and that is not only the case in the assemblies, lower house of the parliament, but when we talk about the Indian institutions, there are no seats in that as well. We don't see any Muslim figure in that.
So there's no quota, so to speak.
Right.
Which is because this is a very interesting point. You see, because there's a lot of criticism on Pakistan that, okay, in Pakistan you see you have separate electorates. So basically the non-Muslims, they are elected separately. But because of that, the non-Muslim representation in Pakistan's parliament, not just in parliament, in Pakistan's institutions, because they have a job quota in all the institutions, it's actually much higher than their percentage of population.
Right.
In India, on the other hand, within the parliament, if you look at the members, the number has been totally decreasing. The number is, in the last one assembly, it was probably 21 or something. So they're out of 543. So look, that is not even, it's what, 5%? Compare that to 16% of the population. Now, if you look in the state institutions, in the higher bureaucracy,
right,
the number of Muslims is less than 1%. If you look at other institutions, like the state institutions, again, it's very, very low.
So, of course, this is a very concerning situation, Mr. Wani, for the minorities, not only Muslims, but other minorities as well in India. But how do the international observers are viewing this situation in India? How do you view the concerns, and what do you make of the concerns that are being raised by international institutions regarding the rise of Hinduism in India and the violation of rights of minorities in India today?
Before coming to that question, we see the Muslims in India who were once the kingmakers of India, now they are surviving for their existence in India. This has become the way of life in India for them. And the second thing is that I want to tell you that when we compare Congress and BJP vis-a-vis their ideologies, though Congress was also of the same ideology, but the ideology this time is pursued by the state. At that time, it was not pursued by the state. It was not condoned by the state. There were Hindu-Muslim rights, there was some of the discrimination against Muslims, but it was not at the state level. At this time, state everywhere comes in and helps the perpetrators who do it. So that's the difference. When the Somnath Mandir was inaugurated after in 50s, and at that time President of India wanted to inaugurate that, but Nehru wrote him that it's not good for you to go to inaugurate
not good for
it.
the optics.
No optics, because it is that your head of state, you can visit any time there, you can go there. And now you see the things have changed. Now the Modi is inaugurating the Ram temple in Ayodhya with whole of his cabinet cheering up for him that we have done it, we have conquered the Muslims in India. This is one. How do international actors see? When we see that international human rights watchdogs all over the world have condemned India for this. A recent report of the State Department that also speaks of it very clearly. And before that, I would see the special rapporteur in UN on the minorities, former special rapporteur. He gave a very hard-hitting report to the Council about the Indian minorities, how the state is discriminating against minorities, how Muslims, Dalits and Christians are being targeted.
Right, but
by
Mr. Wani, do you think that these reports are enough? Like you earlier alluded to the Jim Crow laws and how it took 2 centuries for the US to go back to initial position. But this is just the beginning of Hinduism, rise of Hinduism in India, and if it is not stopped at this point in time, it might take decades or another century for protection of the rights of minorities in India. So don't you think that some concrete measures are needed at this point in time by these international observers?
You see, at international observers, they can name and shame, they can point out what bad is happening anywhere, what the state is doing. They don't have any teeth to bite at any level. We have seen even the International Court of Justice issuing warrants against Israel and all that, but we see the atrocities are there, and the incursions from the Israelis is there. Nobody is stopping them. That's one part of it. But it is up to now the Indians to respond to these. The Indian youth, the Indian educated people, the Indian civil society, they will have to think about the India's future. Because if they fail to address this at this point of time, if they give the BJP another term, if they give the Modi another term, then nobody is going to save the Indian minorities or even the so-called secular Indians who are living there. Already Modi, the first to start with, he just victimizes those voices in India. All those who used to speak of human rights, who used to speak of secularism, who used to speak of pluralism in India and society, those voices were already created. But they need to come out, they need to speak it, and only then we can stop the... This.
So, Irtaza, in your opinion, what can Indian voters do when we talk about what kind of strategies rather they can employ to stop to make it a legal part of the Indian constitution or the Indian system so that minority rights are protected? Do you think that voters are going to be doing something, or this is going to be the beginning of end for Indian Muslims and other minorities within India?
It surely seems like a bleak future, at least in the short term, in one sense. Because we must keep in account the way Shashi Tharoor explained, the millions of WhatsApp groups and the communicative strategies that have been used by the BJP, in the last 10 years through WhatsApp forward, so on and so forth. And also the nexus of the corporate media, film industry and nationalism, which have literally created the brand Modi over time. So in one sense, reading on Wire and some of the international publications, the standard trope is that the youth right now is more tech savvy and will be able to negotiate through the plethora of information that is thrown at them and be able to make the rational choice. But you see this phenomena of right-wing populism happening even in the West, where lifestyle liberals who might be liberal in their outlook end up voting for right-wing political parties. I guess it's important to warn the voters at this point in time that what seemingly does not, because it's not hitting you directly, so you don't pay much heed to it, but eventually any semblance of difference or diversity in India will be silenced if this regime is allowed to continue on. And one important thing to state is that according to the empirical evidence that has been studied by an economist, I forget the name right now, but he suggested that supermajority governments in India have actually not enacted radical legislative reforms or constitutional reforms as opposed to coalition governments. So we don't know, maybe on election days and the way things are going, the opposition might be able to bring up a surprise or two, and that's the short-term hope at this point in time, because the ideological motives, even at the Ayodhya temple, for example, of Prime Minister Modi, reflect that now he's trying to project himself as a high priest as well, and that always spells danger.
Right, right. So a lot of responsibility lies on the shoulders of Indian voters at this point in time, and the third phase, we know that is going to be continuing from May 7th. May 7th. But as per Indian Constitution, the results cannot be announced before June 4th, of course. But let's talk about the role of United Nations experts. Do you think there are some systems in which we can protect, or rather these organizations, multilateral organizations, Human Rights Watch and other institutions can do something practical or substantial to protect the rights before it's too late?
Well, see, I think we have to be pragmatic. The fact is that United Nations or international institutions would have a very limited role. They can raise the voice, but India always categorically rejects any intervention of this sort. And they don't really pay, quite frankly, they don't really pay much attention to it. You know, they're a big country. They are a country which is growing very fast. They're already fifth largest economic power in the world in terms of GDP, and said to be sort of, you know, probably like amongst the top 3 in the years to come. So, and within the Western calculus of geostrategy, they have a very important place. So because of that, they know that they don't really have to pay heed to the UN institutions. You know, we have seen how the Israelis, you know, not just what came out of the UNSC, which is not easy to accomplish, but also what came out of the ICJ, that ruling, they were able to totally ignore that. So India is even a bigger power. On the other hand, okay, India, because they're trying to build this, the whole persona, this whole hype of a shining India, incredible India, as a rising India. So perhaps for the optics' sake, they would like to sort of, you know, like, okay, not hear too many of such voices coming. That's one thing. The second is the civil services, or the, you know, society organizations, let's say within India, or the Indian judiciary. Now, what we've seen over the last few years, particularly India, is this term, the second term of Modi, the Indian judiciary has become much more docile than before. You know,
and rather complicit in these actions of Modi.
Yeah, some people would say that, but the fact is that, you know, like, they're much less sort of, you know, like, sort of, you know, vibrant or robust than before in taking a position and sort of, you know, in protecting the basic tenets of India's constitution, so to speak. So they are not going to be as big a factor. Now, civil society organizations have been weakened in India as well. So that leaves us to the last sort of, you know, the last, but perhaps the biggest factor. That is the electorate. So let's see what is the electorate's role, because see, that is eventually what they fear. Because what if they lose the elections? If not this one, what the next one? And what if they lose sort of, you know, a big chunk of seats in this election? Because their aim is to get a 2/3 majority with their allies, perhaps. In those terms, let's see what are his strengths and weaknesses. The strength is, you know, we have this very interesting plank, Modi ki guarantee. So what is Modi ki guarantees? One is that he said he brought India from number 9 to the number 5th biggest economy in the world. Now he says during this term, he will make India the top 3rd economy in the world. That is one. The second guarantee is that he brought, he said he brought, he claims 400 million people out of poverty, and now whatever is left, he'll bring them out of poverty in this term. Then he's talking about broad-based reforms. Some of the promises he made, he did not fulfill. He had said in his last election manifesto that they will double the income of farmers in India. That did not happen, and that's why we see, because of that, another demand.
And how do you compare these strategies, these promises to Congress or India Alliance?
Yeah, the India Alliance, they had come up with this very inclusive plank and sort of, a little more progressive and sort of,
And don't you think that should be something that should be resonating with the Indian voters?
Yeah, it should have been, but like for some reasons, for multiple reasons, it did not. And what are those reasons? Number one, Modi's persona. This is a larger than life persona. He's created a cult, a personality cult in India. And I've seen this amazing transformation that even very educated Indians outside India, living in the US and all those very developed countries, they are now big fans of Modi. That's one thing. Second, his record of successes in terms of the economic successes that they've got in the last 10, 15 years, the very high rate of growth.
But
bringing all those people up.
When we see the situation on ground, that is very much different from what the data or the figures are telling us. Yeah. And of course, the media is not free to tell people that. So that might be another factor.
There are two streams here. It's very interesting. One stream is, okay, the accomplishments are there. We can't dispute them. The fact that the GDP growth rate, okay, it might be, let's say even if they're fudging the figures a bit, it's still over 6-7%. That's a lot. Second is, okay, a lot of people have been brought up poverty. That is true. But the third thing is that India, their foreign reserves, have grown to over 600. Their exports have grown topped 650 billion a year. So all these things are there. India's political power in the world has increased also, but not because of Modi's doing, but because of the geostrategic factors. On the negative side, on the downside, what we see is, in India, 1% now, India's 1% is controlling 40% of Indian wealth. The inequality in India is now amongst the top 3 in the world. So there are two Indias, so to speak. On the one hand, the rich are getting. Last year, 80 more Indians, they were included in the Forbes billionaires list. But on the other side, we still see hundreds of millions of people without toilets, hundreds of millions of people.
Of course. There are a lot of differences when we talk about the figures and the poverty levels and the promises that were made by Modi. But coming back to minority rights, what do you think can the Indian institutions do to protect these or challenge these policies that are being led by Modi or BJP if they get a third term?
I don't think so. Unfortunately, we see from 2014 onwards, each and every organ of the Indian government, be that judiciary, be that army, even army, it was not previously, but army, Indian judiciary, Indian executive and everybody has been taken over by the radical Hindus. And this ideology has been inculcated each and everywhere by this regime. As Ambassador was telling us, the WhatsApps which were spread, the message which have been spread, the way they target the majority community to make them to threat them that they are at the threat, and the second is to make them aware about how they have to behave, and in that way they have now brainwashed each and everyone in India in that way. And anybody who comes in power in the Indian institutions, we have seen the Indian judiciary in the current regime, how they behaved. In past, we have seen the same Indian judiciary, the same Supreme Court advocating that the Article 370 is irrevocable, it cannot be abrogated. But the same judiciary this time says it is abrogated and it is abrogated and everything is done that is done.
And so the system is moving in that direction.
And in case of triple talaq or this single code and all these things, Previously, these were discussed, but the courts at that time they stopped this.
Even
but
the
this time
citizenship
they
law,
are citizenship law. But this time they are interfering in each and everybody's domain. This radical ideology has intervened there, and that is causing the huge loss to the society as well.
Of course.
And unfortunately, if this continues, this this current regime continues, I think the Indian neighbors will have to face much and more, because then the minorities will have the only one option than to resort to violence. And then when
and of course, and we have seen a number of instances of communal violence in India. Irtaza, lastly, what do you think of international community's response to this communal violence rising in India, and what do you make of the upcoming elections results, what they would be meaning for minorities in India?
So it is true that only 8% of India's Muslims voted for the BJP in 2019, and they are increasingly voting as a bloc against Mr. Modi's party. 77% supported anti-BJP alliance in Bihar in 2020-21, 75% backed the Trinamool, and 79% supported the opposition Samajwadi Party in Uttar Pradesh. But it must be kept in mind. I mean, I'm a political scientist. I'm not a spin doctor, so I don't know what actually will happen. But religion is one factor. Caste is an important factor. The north-south divide, and also regional dynamics make things really complicated if prediction is sorted as an end in itself. On the one hand. But on the other hand, it must be kept in mind that voting behaviors in post-colonial developing societies such as ours necessarily depend on four main factors, if I may generalize. And number one is the charisma of the leader, where Modi is winning. On the other hand, kinship networks, the Biradri caste networks, which, for example, play a massive role in Uttar Pradesh. And then there is clientelistic politics and patronage networks, where Modi is also winning. And unfortunately, the last is manifestos of the political parties. And I think that is where, in the battle of ideas, if the India Alliance has been able to change some of the perceptions about politics, I think that is where this battle will be won first and foremost.
Of course, I thank all three of my panelists for their valuable input. And when we talk about these Indian elections and the rise of Hinduism in India, a lot of responsibility now lies on the shoulders of Indian voters. That's all from Game Changer tonight. Take care. Allah Hafiz.